Appreciate everybody taking time today to register and learn for our upcoming application period. It's like people are being introduced from the lobby. Okay. I think we have about 80 some people registered, things like that. All right, we're going to go ahead and start. Good morning. My name is Zach Trogdon. I am the Chief of Public Transportation here at DRPT, and good morning. I hope wherever you are in the Commonwealth on this beautiful fall day, it's one of those days that we're just so fortunate to have. If you're like me, you're probably saying, I can't believe that another year has already gone by, and we're here to talk about the fiscal year 2026 grant application cycle already, but here we are. And this is such an exciting time for us at DRPT to see all the plans and projects that you all have going on, and just to be reminded of the great work that you're doing in your communities and around the Commonwealth. We do have our challenges this year. We've kind of talked about it some over the last few months and year about just some of the one-time pandemic funding that is been coming to a close. So we certainly do have our challenges on that, but at the same time, we expect to have another great year working with you all, on your projects and in your community. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our planning team, and a lot of you that have been attending these things for years are very familiar with Mr. Dan Sonnenklaar, and so I will turn it over to him and hit the ground running. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Zach. I appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everybody. As Zach mentions, this is our FY26 State Transit Programs Overview, where we will be highlighting our FY26 funding opportunities and grant programs, and some other relevant policies and processes that we are working on. So as a quick public service announcement before we start here, if there are any human service transportation providers on this call, so those are our 5310 recipients, this will mostly not be relevant to the 5310 program, unless, of course, you're applying for one of our other funding opportunities, like our technical assistance program. Most of what is covered in here will not be relevant to the human services program. There will be another opportunity to hear that information. And so with that, I'll go ahead and get started. I will be presenting the first half of the presentation today, and my colleague Wood Hudson will be taking the reins in the second half. So what we have here is the agenda for our meeting today. So we will start with a quick overview and look ahead of the FY26 grant cycle, followed by a little bit of an overview of the web grants registration and requirements that will be needed to apply for grants this cycle. Then we will get into our grant programs, and I will speak a little bit about the Merit Capital Assistance Program and the Merit Operating Assistance Program. I will also go over some reporting, performance data reporting updates, and then hand it off to Wood, who will cover our Merit Special Programs, our Transit Ridership Incentive Program, our MPO funding, the Metropolitan Transportation Funding of Section 5303. He will also talk about Transit Development Plan and Transit Strategic Plan updates and requirements, other ongoing initiatives, and he will review the calendar of important dates in this year's cycle. Slide, please. So just a little housekeeping before we get started here as well. You all will see this slide come up at various points throughout the presentation today. Right now, all participants are in listen-only mode, but we will have question and answer breaks at key points throughout the presentation. There will also be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So to ask questions, please submit them within the chat feature of Microsoft Teams, or request to be unmuted by the DRPT moderator. And we have Miriam who will take you off mute to ask your question. As always, this webinar recording will be posted on our website under application resources on the Merit webpage of the DRPT website, which is listed here, and it will be linked also in the version that we distribute. So without further ado, the first thing that we always like to mention at the beginning of this presentation are a little bit about our guidance documents. So the most relevant document to the information that will be covered today is the one on the left here, which is the DRPT Blue Book, which is our guidance for applying for grants. But we also have the DRPT Purple Book, which is our grant administration procedures. Both of the current versions are available on our website in multiple places and can be sent to you also through your DRPT program managers or other contacts you have here. So please take a look at the Blue Book for more details that are not necessarily covered in this webinar in creating your applications this year. So next slide, please. Thank you. And next slide again. Just a little bit here on grants management. Web Grants is our current or grants management program. And we launched Web Grants last year. So you all should be familiar with the interface if you've had grants with us or if you've submitted applications over the past year. But I just wanted to go over a few key points with this software that you will need to keep in mind when submitting grants in the FY26 cycle. So please verify that your account information is up to date and ensure that users from your agencies have been registered in the system. We moved away from our previous grants management system that had a master user in the past. Web Grants notably does not have the concept of a master user. So there's a bit of a different way of approaching managing staff assigned to grants within the system. And what you'll need to do is that you'll need to add staff involved in grants management and tracking as additional grantee contacts to the application when it's being developed. Or if you add them later, you can add them to the grant once they're awarded, if they are awarded. We do encourage you to add all staff at the application phase that you think will be involved in the management of a grant. That way, it will show up on everybody's dashboard and people will be able to see the grant if it is awarded. Per our VITA policy, VITA is our Virginia IT agency. Web Grants, unfortunately, will log you off after 10 minutes of inactivity. And so please keep that in mind when inputting information for your grant applications. So a couple of slides here with some screenshots of Web Grants. We have produced resources regarding registration and applications, which are available on our main website. But here I'll just go over a few pointers on getting started. Grantees will only be able to see the posted funding opportunities that we are currently accepting applications for at any given point in time. And once you log into Web Grants, what you'll need to do is navigate to the left side of your screen where it says funding opportunities to see those that are open and available. Once you click on a funding opportunity, which is listed in the middle bottom of the image here, you can actually change the order of them by clicking the top of each of those the columns in the table, and you can navigate to the funding opportunity that you are interested in. Once you click on that funding opportunity, you will see what appears on the next slide, which is a landing page for that funding opportunity. So here you will see a number of pieces of information. At the top, it includes the current applications under this funding opportunity that you've already started or submitted. You will also see contact information for the program officer for that funding opportunity, should you have any questions. It will also include a description of the funding opportunity below and relevant attachments. And to start a new application within that funding opportunity, you will need to click the green button that says Start New Application. And that's how you get started. If you need further information on how to develop your applications, please refer to our DRPT website where we have a number of videos and resources available to you all. All right, so we will start here with our capital assistance program. And you can go to the next slide, Miriam. And so I'll give a brief overview here of the program and the parameters of that program. And please, if you have any questions, hold them until we have a pause in about 10 slides or so. So within the capital assistance program, we have a robust prioritization process that consists of the steps outlined here. So we first screen projects for eligibility. We look at whether or not those projects are included in an approved transit strategic plan or development plan. We review open grants in our systems for the same assets that have not necessarily been spent, and we check for readiness to implement. So we look at for the completion of a study or engineering and design for specific kinds of projects that need some additional work prior to being implemented. Once we screen them for eligibility, those eligible projects are filtered into three categories by project type, which is listed here. So we have state of good repair projects, minor enhancement projects, and major expansions. I'll get into a little bit more on how we define those three categories in a moment. Projects are then scored according to the methodology that we outline in our Transit Capital Assistance technical documentation, which is always available on our website. It is also linked here in the presentation and will be linked in the PDF version of this presentation. Projects are then ranked according to the scoring that is outlined, and funding is finally allocated to those that meet or exceed a scoring threshold for each of those three categories each year. And a note here that the scoring thresholds for each categories are dynamic, and they're based on the pool of applicants, or the pool of applications rather, received, and the funds available in a given year. Slide, please. So this slide spells out the three different categories within our capital assistance program. First, we have the state of good repair projects, which we provide up to 68% in state match. This includes capital projects or programs to replace or rehabilitate an existing asset, but it excludes major capital construction projects with a total cost over $3 million. So really, this is the replacement and rehab of specific existing assets for which you all have an in-service date on the books for. Within the minor enhancement category, we also offer up to 68% state match. And in this category, we're referring to capital projects or programs that add capacity or include the purchase of new assets, meeting the criteria outlined below. So the total project cost needs to be $3 million or less, or for expansion vehicles, the project should include 5 or less vehicles or 5% or less of the fleet size, whichever is greater. So if your agency operates a fleet of, or a large fleet of vehicles, you can qualify for a minor enhancement project of greater than 5 vehicles. This category also should be where you all input and submit projects for engineering and design of infrastructure and facilities. And this is engineering and design of any cost. So even if it exceeds $3 million, we ask you all to submit a minor enhancements application for that project. And this also includes the purchases of assets to replace unspecified items as needed. So those things that maybe you're not replacing an item with a specific in-service date. It also could include grouped programs of projects and what we call special asset categories, which I'll outline on the next slide. And finally, we have our major expansion projects, which we offer up to 50% in state match. And this is really our big capital projects that aim to add, expand, or improve transit services or facilities within the following parameters: that the total project cost exceeds $3 million. If it's expansion vehicles, that it is over 5 vehicles or more than 5% of the fleet size. And also this includes all projects that include the replacement of an entire existing facility. And so, yes, that is how we divide up our projects within the capital assistance program. So as I mentioned on the last slide, we have this concept of special asset categories. And so for all of the types of projects listed here, we ask that you please submit minor enhancement applications. So this includes tools, maintenance equipment, spare vehicle and rail parts, building and facility items and fixtures. those grouped assets and programs of projects that are less than $3 million. This one's a little bit more complicated than others, but this includes large groups of assets that can't really be broken down into subcomponents. But notably here, we do not allow you to submit groups projects for the replacement or rehabilitation of vehicles. You will need to submit those in the state of good repair program. This also includes other capital finance strategies, which are things like capital cost of contracting or previously approved debt service for projects that have been approved in previous years. And so if you have any projects that fall into these categories, please be sure to submit them as minor enhancement applications. Next slide, please. So a little bit of scoring for SGR projects or state of good repair projects. We generate a score for those projects based on two categories. One is called the asset condition score. And so this is awarded based on an asset's age and mileage for vehicles compared to the estimated service life of that vehicle or asset. In FY24 and beyond, we've updated how these projects receive scoring within this scoring category. So assets will begin to receive points when they have reached 80% of their estimated service life for age and or mileage. And that's just noted on this schedule below. If an asset has not reached 80%, it will not generate points in either category. And what we do here is we average the two together for vehicles. So if you have a vehicle that has reached 85% of its ESL for age, but 110% for mileage, we would add up the two scores and divide by 2 to award an asset condition score. Next slide, please. We also have a scoring category called the Service Impact Score, and this applies to both state of good repair and minor enhancement projects. And this is much more of a qualitative score that's based on a qualitative assessment based on the project type that the project falls into. And this slide here just outlines the schedule of those scores, and you will see about 15 categories that will generate a default score that is different depending on the character of the project. And so again, all state of good repair projects receive a service impact score and an asset condition score, whereas minor enhancement projects just receive a service impact score. Next slide, please. In addition, for state of good repair and minor enhancement projects, we also offer what we call incentive scores. So projects can receive incentive points if the project includes certain characteristics that satisfy certain statewide goals or that satisfy certain program requirements of our agency. And so there are 4 categories that can generate up to a total of 10 points in 4 categories. Each category can generate 5 points total, but you cannot exceed 10 points total per project. And this includes a zero emissions technology category, where a project would be awarded 5 additional points if it includes the procurement of zero emissions vehicles or the installation of zero emissions infrastructure. There's an innovation category, which we award 5 points under if the project includes the installation of real-time departure and arrival information or automated data collection, scheduling, and dispatch technology, or utilization of transit signal priority, the installation of safety technology, or mobile ticketing. And so if your projects include those characteristics, they will generate an additional 5 points. In addition, we have a criteria area called safety and comfort around customer facilities that would award projects 5 additional points if they include enhanced lighting at transit stops or stations, enhancements for pedestrians and accessibility improvements connecting passengers to transit, and projects that include benches or shelters. And finally, in the last category, which we call agency accountability, we award 5 points to all capital projects if an agency complies with all 4 of the compliance sections here. So this is compliance with state asset management requirements, This is ensuring that Trans Am updates are completed on time for vehicles and facilities. This is also compliance with state strategic planning requirements, that you have an up-to-date transit strategic plan or transit development plan. It also includes compliance with the state capital planning requirements, which is that you are submitting and participating on time in the 5-year capital budget process, and compliance with state performance reporting. And so this would be that throughout the year, you all are submitting performance data on time, and it should not say in Olga, it's actually in SharePoint now, as we've updated our performance data collection methodology. And so in order to receive the 5 points for agency accountability, your agency will need to comply with all 4 of those categories. Next slide, please. So a few additional pieces of information here. For major expansion projects, as of last year, we introduced a pre-application requirement, and that pre-application requirement extends to all major expansion projects this year. So for FY26, if you are going to submit a major expansion project that includes capital construction, vehicle expansion, technology improvements, passenger amenity improvements, all of them will need to submit a pre-application by December 1st this year. So if you are planning on applying for a major expansion project and have not started that pre-application, please do so in the next 2 weeks. You will not be able to submit a major expansion project application if you have not submitted a pre-application. I'll repeat that. You will not be able to submit a major expansion application without completing a pre-application this cycle. Next slide, please. This is an update here on shelter projects, and it's the same update that we gave last year. Grantees, so you all are not required to submit the shelter project supplemental form anymore that we required for a number of years prior to FY25. In 26, we at DRPT will not be assigning out state-controlled federal funds to shelter projects. So that includes our 5339 money, FTA 5311 rural money, and ADTAP rural money. We still ask, though, that all passenger shelter and amenity projects be submitted through the Merit Capital Assistance Program, though there is dual eligibility through the TRIP program now as well. And so we ask that you all submit capital assistance grants applications for shelter and amenity projects, and DRPT will decide what is the best fund source for your project. Next slide, please. As always, DRPT will consider requests for alternative propulsion vehicles. So this includes electric, hydrogen, natural gas, hybrid vehicles, and others. But this is based on several factors, including those listed here. This is includes the leveraging of local and federal funding to support these projects, the inclusion of alternative fuel vehicles in the strategic development plan, or rather the transit development plan or the transit strategic plan, or other articulated plans that have been approved by local governments or boards. We also look for approved funding for necessary infrastructure alterations, so we will not fund an electric vehicle if you all haven't shown us how you will charge that vehicle. And we also want to see the clear intention of migrating a significant portion of the fleet to alternative vehicles. We will every now and again fund 1 or 2 vehicles on a trial basis, but if you are applying for multiple vehicles, we would like to see something like a transition plan or a TDP or TSP that highlights the desire to transition a significant portion of your fleet over to those alternative propulsion technologies. There are other resources available for alternative fuels, so there are minion rebates and others available out there. And projects for charging infrastructure are also eligible for capital assistance funding, generally through our minor enhancement or our major expansion program, depending on how large those requests are. Next slide, please. So a couple notes here on federal discretionary funding incentives that we have introduced over the past few years. We have introduced a lower local match requirement for capital projects that will be supported with federal discretionary funds. So we will now allow for a local match that will determine once you show us the full funding package. Generally speaking, we require a minimum of 4% in local matching funds for all capital projects that are supported with state capital. But now the minimum can be lowered on a case-by-case basis if approved for a federal discretionary grant. In addition, we have set up a discretionary grant reserve, which has allowed us the flexibility to allocate funds to a reserve account that can be used throughout the fiscal year to support these projects that receive federal discretionary funding. So if your agency is looking at particularly large projects or any federal discretionary applications, we have resources available to help lower your local match requirements and to provide those matching funds throughout the fiscal year. A couple notes here on vehicle rehabilitations. So within the category of vehicle rehabs, we often get questions about the difference between rebuilds, overhauls, and repowers. All are available for merit capital funding. However, there is a difference in our requirements for what happens to the vehicles if you pursue a vehicle rebuild versus a vehicle overhaul. So a vehicle rebuild, it's really the definition and the difference between these two, as we've defined it, has mostly to do with the timing. A rebuild happens towards the end of a vehicle's useful life, and it requires the extension of the estimated service life with DRPT and FTA by a minimum of 4 years or 100,000 miles. Repowers, so this is the replacement of an engine with either a new engine or a different propulsion technology. Those repowers that are part of a rebuild will require the extension of the ESL as well. For these kinds of projects, we will need to see documentation of the planned modifications within the application. And once the modifications are complete, Trans-Am, our vehicle database, will need to be updated to reflect the new estimated service life of the vehicle. On the other hand, vehicle overhauls, the timing of those is usually earlier in a vehicle's useful life, and those projects do not require the extension of the estimated service life with DRPT or FTA. Repowers that are part of an overhaul do not similarly require that ESL extension. And so that's how we've kind of drawn the line between these two types of projects. If you are pursuing a rehab towards the end of the vehicle's life, it will likely trigger an extension of the estimated service life. Next slide, please. All right, now a couple slides here on the capital assistance program within Web Grants. In Web Grants, the Merit Capital Assistance Program has 4 funding opportunities. And I know that sounds a little strange since we have 3 categories, but it's because there are different requirements within a couple or within different kinds of state of good repair projects. So what you will find in Web Grants once you log in is the major expansion application, a minor enhancement application, and 2 state of good repair applications, one for vehicles specifically that has a number of fields and questions to fill out where you would indicate the vehicle identification number of the vehicles you are replacing. And then there is a state of good repair other, which is where you would apply for the replacement of other assets that have specific in-service dates. And so once you click into one of these, if you go to the next slide, please, you will see, once you start building an application and go through the wizard to set it up, there will be instructions at the top of the screen for each of these applications with a blue background that indicates what should be included. So these instructions should guide you on selecting the correct application for what you are applying for. So please pay attention to the instructions that are included here. And if you've selected the wrong one, please just go back and start a new application for the correct application type. Next slide, please. All right. I have just a few slides on operating assistance, and then I'm going to pause for questions. I saw a couple of things come in. So our Merit Operating Assistance Program provides funding for eligible operating expenses for all modes of public transportation services throughout the state. The program funds up to 30% of operating expenses. and it is a performance-based formula that determines the allocation to each agency each year. The methodology that we use to determine the specific allocations um, throughout the state is illustrated below, and it's based on several factors, including service delivery factors, sizing, and performance metrics. Within the sizing metrics, we look at operating costs, ridership, vehicle revenue hours, and vehicle revenue miles. And for the FY26 cycle, we will be looking at the FY24 audited figures for each of these sizing metrics. For performance metrics, we look at 5 different measures. That is passengers per revenue hour, passengers per revenue mile, operating cost per revenue hour, operating cost per revenue mile, and operating cost per passenger. And to look at those performance metrics, we look at trends over a 4-year period. So for FY26, we will be looking at data from FY21, 22, 23, and 24. And that is audited data that you all have reported to us. Next slide, please. So within web grants, the Operating Assistance Program has 2 funding opportunities associated with it, one for urban agencies and one for rural. Now, most agencies will select just one, either urban or rural, but for agencies that operate both urban and rural service, both applications should be submitted. So those that operate both services will need to submit 2 different applications. So the applications have been streamlined in web grants compared to our Olga system and should be easier to complete, and I believe they were easier to complete last year. All financial data will be entered into one form that is the main form of the application. The ALI level data for previous year expenses is no longer required in this application. Instead, all applicants will need to provide a total actual reimbursable expenses figure. Excuse me. Next slide, please. At the bottom of each of the operating assistance applications, you will see an operating assistance summary that will provide a summary of the financial data that you input, and you all can use to review the data that has been entered into the system. So I would keep an eye on the bottom of the data fields, or I'm sorry, of the data form. Next slide, please. In the final application tab that's called budget, please feel free to leave the total project cost set to 0 for these applications. DRPT staff will overwrite this with the operating formula allocations. So you can put in whatever you want here, but you can just leave it at 0 as well, since we don't know what the allocation will be until the formula is run. Next slide, please. Okay. And so I think I have 2 or 3 slides here on performance data reporting, and then I will pause for questions. So performance data reporting has evolved a bit over the past few years. The 2018 General Assembly passed HB 1539, which requires the CTB to allocate operating assistance solely on the basis of performance metrics. So transit grantees that wish to receive operating assistance need to submit performance data and audited expense data to us annually. The data should be carefully reviewed by each agency prior to submission to DRPT, and all agencies across the Commonwealth are impacted by data quality issues. And so we've done a lot over the past few years to really enhance our performance data and reporting and review processes. If you are a recipient of merit operating assistance currently, you are familiar with the performance data reporting requirements. We collect monthly data and annual data from agencies, and the monthly performance metrics are all on display on our open data portal, which is linked here. Next slide, please. So here we have a description of what we collect monthly versus annual. Data submissions are due on or before the last business day of each month for the previous month's activity. New service should be incorporated into the monthly reporting, even if it is supported by a demonstration assistance or trip grants. And transit grantees must submit the 3 data points below: ridership, vehicle revenue hours, and vehicle revenue miles. And we collect this data now in a SharePoint module. Also, operators must attach copies of backup documentation that support each metric being reported. And so within the SharePoint environment, there is an opportunity to do that. In addition, annually, agencies that report passenger miles traveled, or PMT, to the National Transit Database must also submit fiscal year PMT by mode directly to DRPT by December 15th each year. So if you are a full reporter that provides PMT data to NTD, you also need to submit it to us by the 15th of December each year. So here we have a couple of points on amending previously submitted data and the annual data review that we perform. Grantees need to amend previously submitted data in SharePoint if errors are discovered. So if you all have done an audit of ridership and found that some of the data that was submitted in previous reported months is incorrect, it is your responsibility to go in and update it within the SharePoint environment. We ask that agencies complete any of these data amendments in SharePoint no later than the December 31st for the previous fiscal year. So for example, any amendments to the FY24 reported data, which ended in June of 2024, any of those amendments are due by December 31st of this year. The reason being is we use that data in the operating assistance formula run during the grant review cycle. In addition, we perform an annual data review, and this year we will be doing it in December of 2024 through January of 2024, where our planners and program managers will conduct a review of all the data submitted for FY24 in order to flag variances and any kind of questions that we have about the reported data. If there are variances identified or issues identified, we will ask that you describe the reason for those variances or those issues. And you will hear from your DRPT program managers in January to verify those FY24 numbers. Next slide, please. All right. Finally, we have a pause for questions. I know that was a lot of information, and so we're happy to track back to another point in the presentation if you have a specific question about a slide. But what questions do you have about capital, operating, or performance data reporting?
Hi, Dan. We have a question in the chat. What is the scope difference between a rebuild versus overhaul?
So the scope can be, from what I understand about rebuilds and overhauls, the scopes can be exactly the same. It really depends on when the work is being done within the useful life of a vehicle. And so if you have a 12-year vehicle and you complete a rehabilitation at 6 years, it would be considered a overhaul. Whereas if you do it at 10 years or 11 years, it would be considered a rebuild, and it would trigger that ESL extension.
That's all the chat questions we have at this time.
It looks
Okay.
like we have a few questions in the Q&A module. Would you like me to read those out to you, Dan?
I can read them, or yeah, I'll read them one by one here. So can you use minor enhancement for bus stops? Yes, you can. For bus stops and shelters and other amenities that would go towards a bus stop, you can certainly apply within the minor enhancement category. Now, if it's to replace the infrastructure that you, at a specific bus stop that you have in-service information for, it is advantageous to apply for it as a state of good repair project. But if you are applying for a number, or maybe a group of bus stops or shelters, or a program that you fund through every year, you can certainly do that through the minor enhancement program, as long as the total project cost is under $3 million. All right, another question here from Matt Scalia. No incentive points for SGR and minor enhancements for LEB technology. And I'm sorry, what is LEB technology? Does anybody have a definition here? as we're waiting for that, I'll move on to the next question. Does a major capital project constructing a dedicated bus lane, not BRT, qualify as an eligible project? So this is for a dedicated bus lane that is not BRT. I believe it would, but I would encourage you to reach out to your program manager or to myself to discuss the parameters of the project. Again, it would be major expansion if it's over $3 million. And did we
Dan,
get any?
I'm gonna assume that Matt's question is a low emission bus rather than a zero emission bus.
Yes. The way that the incentive points work now, low emissions buses do not receive the incentive score. Only zero emissions buses. Good question. Okay. One more question just came in here from Raymond's. For capital assistance major expansion eligibility, there were 3 items. Do all 3 need to be met or only one of the 3? I believe are you referring to the definition page? We don't have a live conversation here. So no, not all 3 of those items that were outlined, not all 3 need to be fulfilled. It's any one of those. And I believe you're referring to where we said that it needs to be above $3 million in cost. It could be the wholesale replacement of a whole facility. And if it's vehicles, it would be more than 5 vehicles or 5% of the fleet size. And so, no, not all of those need to be met. Only one of those would need to be met. Are there any other questions? If not, I will kick it over to Wood. If any, something else came in. Oh, okay. From Barbara Smith, there are incentive score points for enhancements to ped accessibility, connecting passengers to transit, which sounds like a sidewalk. Can minor enhancement be used for sidewalk to stops? Yes, a minor enhancement project could be, or you could apply for a minor enhancement grant to improve the pedestrian access to transit stops and stations. It would need to connect to transit. So it cannot just be a pedestrian project. It would need to be a connection to public transportation. But yes, it would qualify. Again, keep an eye on the total project cost. If it goes above $3 million, it would need to be a major expansion project. All right, that looks like the extent of the questions for now. Please note that we will have time at the end for more questions if any others come up. And so now I'll kick it over to Wood Hudson to take us through the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to run through the latter half of the presentation. I'll be covering the Merit Special Program, TRIP, Section 5303, TDP and TSP update requirements, and other ongoing initiatives, and finish things out with a review of the calendar. Next slide, please. So to kick things off, I wanted to touch on our Workforce Development Grant Program. This grant supports the development of intern and apprentice programs centered on careers in public transportation. Agencies should focus on apprenticeships that support long-term talent pipeline needs. This grant has a match rate of 80% state and 20% local participation. Eligible applicants include transit agencies, local governments, public service corporations, PDCs, MPOs, human service agencies involved in rural transit, and commuter assistance program operators. Eligible expenses in this program include wage, fringe benefits, training. This may include things like CDL or appropriate certifications and associated travel. We can also use this program to match other eligible non-DRPT grants. If you're considering using this for match, please reach out to the program manager for this grant program to discuss your unique needs in more detail. Next slide, please. Technical assistance. This grant program supports a variety of planning-related activities, such as studies, plans, technical evaluations, feasibility studies for major capital projects. It also supports any federal requirements that you all may be trying to address. Examples include TAM, development of PTASPs, and also finally CAP strategic plans, TDM plans, and of course, all of your TDPs and TSP needs. This is a match rate of 50% local and 50% state. Eligible applicants remain the same as the intern program and include transit agencies, local governments, public service corporations, PDCs, MPOs, human service agencies involved in rural transit, and commuter assistance program operators. With this program, applicants must clearly demonstrate how resources will benefit transit. And if you're submitting more than 2 applications, we ask that you reach out to Amy Garbarini and just identify kind of your applications in terms of priority. So when we're making funding decisions, we can factor that into the calculus. Next slide, please. Demonstration project assistance. This is a grant program that supports and incentivizes implementation of new transit service and tests innovative and non-traditional public transit solutions. It's a way to reduce the financial risk and fill funding gaps for projects and activities that might not be directly suited for other state programs. We generally have a 12 to 18 month time frame for projects, so this can be a rather short timeline if you're looking to both implement and get off the ground, which is why if you're considering a demonstration project, you might want to start with technical assistance first in order to get some of the initial planning done prior to looking to implement. Match rate is 80% state, 20% local. Eligible applicants include transit agencies, local governments, PDCs, and MPOs in this case. If you're applying and submitting multiple applications, please reach out to Tiffany and identify your applications in terms of priority rank, again, so we can factor that into our scoring calculus. Next slide, please. Just a reminder for those of you in the past that have considered demo projects, it is a grant program that has 2 kind of unique paths. First one being a type 1 new service application. This is for areas or markets that aren't currently served by public transportation or additional connections to areas currently served. Feasibility or other suitable documents are needed. It's not for replacing or discontinued routes, and not for traditional public transit services eligible for funding through other state and federal programs. Type 2 is innovation and technology. This is focused on a test of proof of concept for new technologies used in public transportation services. This is not for technological solutions that have been deployed for years and have proven effectiveness. And projects in both areas currently served and not served by public transportation. Next slide, please. All right, marketing transit service. Public transit providers can apply for funding through the Commuter Assistance Program to market, advertise, or promote transit service. The use of the application the purpose is for an increase in ridership. It has a performance measure associated with it, which is to track ridership. This is another 80-20 grant. Eligible projects and expenses include marketing for new service or specified route, development of marketing materials and advertisements, paid advertising, promotional events to attract new riders, and things like Tri-Transit Week or some similar promotional activities, and free rides for new riders as well. Ineligible expenses include the printing or making of bus schedules, public notices, fare changes, and policy announcements. Next slide, please. All right, now I'm going to jump into the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP. Next slide, please. TRIP regional connectivity. Eligible project types are develop or implement regionally significant transit routes, creation of finance subsidy models, deployment of integrated fare collection, addition of bus-only lanes, or transit prioritization on regionally significant corridors. Eligible participants include public service corporations that serve urbanized areas with a population in excess of 100,000. You can see those areas identified on the map on the right of this slide. Transportation district commissions, local governments, and private nonprofit transit providers. Funding duration for this program is up to 5 years. Next slide, please. So TRIP, zero fare and low income. Eligible project types include the provision of subsidized or fully free passes to low-income populations, elimination of fares on high-capacity corridor, establishing zero-fare zones, deployment of entirely fare-free systems, or fare policy planning. Projects will be reimbursed on a net fare collection basis. Eligible recipients include public transit service corporations, transportation district commissions, local governments, private nonprofit transit providers, and the funding duration for this grant program is up to 3 years. Note that all system-wide zero fare applicants must commit to an additional 4th year of operation with 100% local dollars and continued state oversight for us to collect and monitor the continued success of a program. Next slide, please. TRIP Public Safety. This one has some different eligible project types. It includes public safety programs and training, public safety planning related activities, and public safety enhancements. So this is for capital items such as the purchase and installation of lighting, purchase and installation of camera systems, purchase and installation of emergency help buttons or call boxes, implementation of intelligent transportation systems that improves the safety of the transit system, purchase of other equipment that directly improves the actual and perceived safety of riders, operators, and other transit employees. Eligible recipients are public transit providers who receive state operating assistance, metropolitan planning organizations, planning district commissions, and other statewide or regional bodies. In this case, funding is for up to 1 year. Next slide, please. So TRIP passenger amenities. The eligible project types under this category are improvements to existing bus stops, addition of new bus stops, improvements to passenger facilities, and bus stop or facility planning. Eligible recipients include public transportation providers, MPOs, PDCs, local governments, and other statewide regional bodies. Funding duration is for up to 1 year for this program. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to move on and cover Section 5303, which pertains to our metropolitan planning organizations. Next slide. The FY26 grant application for 5303 programs is due May 1st. 5303 funds can be carried over for 1 year and must be outlined in the UPWP by your fiscal year. Applications must include ALIs that align with activities described in the UPWP. The usage of other is only accepted on a case-by-case basis. So please reach out to your planners if you plan to use the other category in your application. UPWP budgets and narratives must clearly identify carryover funds and activities separate from new funds on the task level. And please refer to the Blue Book or Purple Book for further information when developing your 5303 applications and unified planning work programs. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to cover transit development plans and transit strategic plans. Next slide. TDP and TSP updates. Last year, DRPT moved away from the annual update letter and implemented the use of an annual worksheet. This year, we are pivoting even more on that, and the annual worksheet will no longer be required. That's being replaced with an enhanced quarterly meeting where DRPT program management staff and DRPT planning staff will have a joint coordinated call with you, the transit agencies, and we'll be collecting and filling out information based on a series of questions that we've developed and an outlined agenda. Those meetings will need to be completed before January 14th. And a reminder that if you're seeking funding assistance for a TDP or TSP update, please apply through the Technical Assistance Grant Program for all of those needs. And lastly, as part of our efforts to refine and make the TDPs and TSPs as useful as possible, we're conducting a survey of grantees about their TDPs and TSPs. So it's a great opportunity for you all to give us some feedback and submit comments. There's a link to the survey here in the presentation, and we'll make sure we can include that in any sort of follow-up materials. That's open until November 15th. So if you haven't already filled it out, please go ahead and submit some feedback to us. Thank you. Next slide. All right, we can take a pause for questions here.
Okay, one question we have in the chat is, if we are requesting additional funds for a new transit facility, would the 3 million threshold apply to the additional funds being requested or the overall cost of the project?
It's a great question. I think I'm going to call up Dan for that one.
Yeah, I think that was for me. So let me look at it really quickly again here. If we're requesting additional funds for a new transit facility, $3 million threshold would apply to the overall cost of the facility. So not just the increase. And so if it's a project that has been funded previously with merit capital assistance funds, we will take that into account when reviewing it. But we ask that you submit an application where you indicate the total cost of the project and the amount that is being requested in this year's application as well.
And we have some more questions. There are incentive score points for enhancement to PED accessibility, connecting passengers to transit, which sounds like sidewalk, can then be used for sidewalk to stops. I think we went over that one. Yes?
Yeah, we went over the ones in the Q&A.
Okay. Then I think we may be done unless anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question.
All right, I'm not seeing any hands, so let's continue with the presentation. Next slide. Next slide, please. All right, transit asset management. These plans, as a reminder, are required under 49 CFR Part 625, and they apply to all recipients of Chapter 53 funds that either own, operate, or manage capital assets used in providing public transportation. Generally, the TAM plan is a tool that aids transit providers in assessing current capital condition, the risk of using those assets, and provides a tool for for how to best balance and prioritize capital asset needs. Next slide, please. DRPT is working on programming the next update to the group TAM plan. We'll begin working on that here this winter, and we will be targeting a refresh of that plan so that we remain in compliance with the TAM guidance. The new plan will be for our FY26 federal fiscal year 26 through federal fiscal year 29. We plan on starting the outreach to both the MPOs and the relevant transit agencies here this winter. So stay tuned as we gear up for that process. We will probably be reaching out to everybody again and scheduling some meetings and discussions around the TAM topics. Some additional items when it comes to TAM. In order to maintain an accurate inventory for TAM, We ask that we remind everybody of the Trans-Am update kind of deadlines, the January 15th and the July 15th of each year, to make sure that everybody's capital assets and vehicles are adequately updated in the Trans-Am system. And lastly, to notify DRPT of any changes when it comes to your accountable executive, as they are the person that signs off on the TAM plan, and in order to remain in compliance, we need to track those changes and update sign off. If you have questions relating to TAM, please reach out to either your DRPT program manager or planner, and we would be happy to engage with you on any of those issues. Next slide, please. Another federal requirement is the Public Transportation Agency safety plans. I just wanted to remind everybody that the bill law did change these requirements a little bit, and it implemented some requirements that are based on the UZA population for where you operate. We've put some resources on our website, including a checklist that can help agencies as they look to review their PTASP and agency safety plans going forward. Next slide, please. Training and technical assistance. I know this is a need that everybody has, so I wanted to make sure that I mentioned two programs that are available to transit agencies. First is the Rural Transit Assistance Program, or RTAP. It provides funding from FTA to assist with design, implementation of training and technical assistance projects and other support services. DRPT's Public Transit Division provides resources for training and technical assistance to rural transportation providers through this RTAP program. These are 100% funds that do not require any sort of local match. The next one is Small Urban Training. These are training scholarships that are available to assist small urban transit operators to further the development of management skills to encourage the development of professional networks by attending training, seminars, workshops, and conferences. All approved small urban training grant scholarships will be reimbursed for up to 80% of eligible expenses. You can find these through the R program section of the DRPT website. That includes a detailed guide. And unlike a lot of our other grant programs, these are rolling. So you can submit an application kind of throughout the year as need arises for trainings and things like that. Next slide, please. Okay, use of bench contracts. Next slide. This is a reminder that DRPT maintains a GPC transit bench contract. This is available to all recipients of DRPT grants. And we have 4 providers currently on contract. Those include Michael Baker, RK&K, WSP, AECOM, and Kimley Horn and Associates. If you have a question about using the bench contract, please reach out to your PM for guidance on how to issue a task order. A new addition to the use of our bench contract is the requirement for independent cost estimates. This is required for projects with over 250K and encouraged for all projects. If you have questions about that, please contact your PMs, and we have some resources that we can happily share about doing an independent cost estimate on a task order to the bench. And a reminder, when it comes to prompt payment for subcontractors, agencies that issue task orders to the GPC bench and use of federal funds to offset the contractor costs include subcontractors on the project are required by the FTA to receive some subcontractor prompt payment forms after the form from the prime. This is intended to certify that the prime has paid the contractor within 30 days of receiving payment from the administering agencies. Urban agencies may use their own form for subcontractor prompt payment, but rural agencies must use DRPT's form. And this is a case, if this applies to you, reach out to your PM and we can make sure we guide you in the correct direction for complying with this. Next slide, please. Okay, cost allocation and indirect costs. This is probably a reminder for most folks on this call that costs must be allocated in accordance with approved cost allocation plans, and plans must include with the submitted application, and we will be reviewing those plans. Indirect costs may be charged to certain DRPT programs via a 15% de minimis rate or a rate approved by a cognizant federal or state agency. DRPT will review your indirect cost rate proposals. This is an example of where the Blue Book is going to be your best friend when it comes to identifying which programs are eligible for those requirements. Next slide. And finally, the calendar of requirements and deadlines for this year. So we have the applications opening on December 1st. Major and expansion pre-applications are due that same day. Then on December 15th, the FY23 PMT data is due. Then on January 14th, Tram-Zam asset data and updates are due. This includes odometer readings. The same date on January 14th, enhanced quarterly meetings need to be completed. On February 1st, all transit applications are due in web grants. April 2025, the draft SIP is presented to the CTB. Also in April, 5-year capital budgets are due to program managers. April and May is when the state public hearings are scheduled. In May 1st, FTA Section 5303 applications are due to DRPT. In May, review of this 5-year capital budgets with DRPT staff is conducted. In June, CTB approves the final SIP, and on July 1 begins the FY26 awards. That's when they become available to everybody. Next slide, please. In case you need it, here is contact information. We are always available. If you have questions, concerns, if you want to run something by us, please reach out to your program manager or the appropriate grant manager for either merit, special, or trip program areas. And I think we can go to the last slide, and that is our last opportunity for question and answers.
We do not have anything in the chat, and we do not have any questions in our Q&A, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand.
I see a hand raised. I think Queenie has a question, if we could unmute her.
I have a question. I'm trying to multitask and do a whole bunch of different things, but listening to your small urban training, does that only apply to 5311 and 5310 recipients?
That's a great question. I think small urban would be our smaller 5307 agencies. And I can see if any of the other DRPT staff want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, Wood, I can chime in on that. This is Grant Sparks. Queenie, so our small urban training program, and Wood is right that it only applies to our small urban 5307s. And we've actually, within the web grant system, we've made only those transit agencies can even see that funding opportunity. So Petersburg is not a small urban agency, obviously in the large urban Richmond area.
Okay, I thought we were small. I was just trying. Thank you.
Of course.
Great. Do we have any additional questions that anybody would like to raise, either in the chat or by raising their hands? Okay, hearing none, we can go ahead and end the webinar. I wanted to thank everybody for their time today and hope everybody has a great afternoon and enjoys this lovely fall weather. As always, DRPT staff is available to answer questions. Your best contacts are your program managers or your planners. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.